If you've been stuck in a recipe rut like me lately, it is time to get inspired. Today I want to share with you some simple recipes that you may not have tried before, all of which are perfect for summer. And the first one is actually one of my favorites, but do not be intimidated by these because they're actually so much simpler to make than they look. Today's recipe is a Vietnamese inspired recipe, and I think it also may be referred to as fresh spring rolls. And this is actually a surprisingly easy recipe to make. Essentially, you're just going to be wrapping all of your fresh ingredients into a rice paper wrap and then dip it in its accompanying sauce. I actually have two sauce recipes to show you guys today. And with that, let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing we're obviously going to need is our rice paper wraps, and this is what is going to be on the outside of the roll. Now, I have seen before that they do have brown rice paper wraps. I usually don't find them at my local Asian market, which is where I found these, but I have seen them before, like on Amazon and places like that. So I will leave a couple links below. If you prefer the brown rice paper wraps, those work equally as well. It's kind of up to you and your preference. I personally use these white rice paper wraps because they're very easy to find at our local Asian market. Now, besides rice paper wraps, I personally think the hero of this dish is the herbs that go inside. So first up, we have our Thai basil. Now, Thai basil is different from Italian basil. As you can see here, the leaves are quite different shape. I actually do have some Italian basil. Let's do a side by side. So as you can see, the leaves of the Thai basil are very long and narrow compared to the Italian basil. In addition, the stem is often like more of a purple color, whereas the Italian basil is a regular green stem. And in addition to the physical differences, there is also quite a taste difference. If you've never had Thai basil before, it has kind of like a licorice-y taste, I would say, which may turn some people off, but it's not a very strong licorice taste. It is just definitely different from Italian basil. In addition, there is also a basil called holy basil, and it looks similar to the Thai basil, but it is different as well. It has more of a spicy and peppery taste. So you definitely do want to look for the Thai basil if you can find it at your local market. I feel it does really make a difference in these rolls, and it's worth buying if you can find it. Also, if you found this basil tip helpful, I would really appreciate if you give this video a like, as it does really help out my channel and helps me bring more videos to you guys. Next up is our mint. Now, I have two different kinds of mint here. These are both from Q's dad's garden, but I'm pretty sure that the regular green mint is very easy to find in the supermarkets. I usually see it in the same section as all the other fresh herbs. This purple one might be a little bit more difficult to find. I know they sell it at the Asian markets, but I'm not sure about the regular grocery stores. So if you can't find the purple mint, that is not a deal breaker at all. Just go for the green mint instead. And our last herb that we're going to use is cilantro, aka coriander. And I believe this one is pretty common, and I'm pretty sure everybody will be able to find it quite easily. Now, of course, we're also going to need some vegetables. I'm just using carrots, baby cucumbers, and a little bit of fresh lettuce. I'm actually just going to mix the lettuce together with all the herbs and just do like a little greens mixture in there. And those will be our vegetables. And then of course you can also add in things like protein. I'm gonna use a little bit of this 5-spice tofu, as well as some mung bean pancakes that I made. If you guys haven't seen that video for how I make the mung bean pancakes, I will link it in the description box below. You can watch it after this video. So those are the two proteins that I am going to use. And then also the noodles. My mother-in-law says to always use noodles in your summer rolls. So I'm just following her advice, as she was born in Vietnam and makes very delicious Vietnamese food. So I'm also going to use some basic rice noodles as part of the filling as well. So now for the vegetables, I think I've showed in videos before that, like the carrots, for example, you can use different types of tools to make them into shreds. You can use a peeler, you can use a grater, you can use a spiralizer, you can use a knife and just julienne them, but essentially we're looking for long, skinny strips. And then with the cucumbers, I find it's actually just easiest to do it with the knife. So again, you just want them in long, thin strips, but the actual thickness of each strip is kind of up to you. But essentially, imagine biting into that roll. You don't want too big of a piece, so just keep that in mind when you're chopping your veggies. So for the mung bean pancakes, I actually modified this recipe a little bit by just adding in some chopped up lemongrass. Now, lemongrass is a very commonly used ingredient in Vietnamese cooking, so I thought it would be nice, instead of doing a lemongrass tofu, to actually add some to these mung bean pancakes. So that's really the only difference for these mung bean pancakes, and of course that's not really a traditional ingredient. I just like to add in extra beans, especially hidden ones where I can. So I thought that would be be a nice way to add a little bit extra flavor and a little bit extra texture and protein and all of those good things. And now for our herbs, I just did equal parts of all the different kinds of herbs, and I just pulled them off the stems because you don't really want to bite into a big piece of stem when you're biting into these rolls. And then I'm also just taking some lettuce pieces and putting those in there as well. Now, you could do a rough chop of all these veggies, but I just feel that it makes a more beautiful mixture. And like, since the rice paper wraps are see-through, you will see some leaves peeking through the wrapper. So I like to leave the leaves whole, and that way it just looks a little more beautiful. But of course, that is personal preference as well. So essentially what we have here is kind of like a big salad with a bunch of herbs in it, and you're just basically wrapping this salad into a rice paper wrap. So you could even do this as a salad if you don't have the rice paper wraps and you just want to eat all of these other things. It makes a really nice salad. I guess that would be like a deconstructed summer roll, which is totally delicious as well. Okay, so now we're ready to wrap. We have our herbs and lettuce, we have our rice noodles, we have all of our chopped veggies, which are carrots and cucumber. We also have the 5-spice tofu and the lemongrass mung bean pancakes. Now, one thing that I have learned, a little tip that I will pass on to you guys, is for these rice paper wrappers. As you can see, they start out completely stiff and dry. And essentially what we're going to do is rotate them through the water for about 10 seconds to make them soft enough to roll into a roll. It kind of takes some practice to learn how to work with them, but something that I've learned, like I said, is to use medium lukewarm water. So you don't want to make it too cold, you don't want to make it too hot. Now, here's the pro tip. You don't want it so soaking wet that it is like a wet rag and can easily be crumpled into a ball. That is too wet. So you're gonna wanna watch it and take it out from the water while it's still slightly stiff, because it will continue to soften as you're adding in all the veggies and wrapping it. So you're just going to want it to be at a pliable state without being overly soft. And then you also want to make sure you have a work surface to wrap your rolls on, and it's just easiest to use a like clean plate or cutting board or something like that. And you want it close to your ingredients. So I'm just going to swap these around. So I'm going to rotate the rice paper wrap through the water first, then put it back on the cutting board, and then add everything in, fold in the edges, and then roll it up. So we're gonna take one, add it to the water, count to about 10. If your rice paper is a little bit older, it may take a little bit longer. If you're using cooler water, it may take a little bit longer, but usually about 10 to 15 seconds. And now you can see it's translucent and pliable, but not so soft that it's lost its shape. There's still some shape there. And now the other thing that I always forget is don't fill your roll too full. You actually want it on the less full side. Not only is it easier to roll up, but it's also just easier to eat. So do just keep that in mind as you are filling your wraps. I know we want to put as much as we can in there, but trust me, it'll be easier to roll and easier to eat. So just add your greens first, and then a tiny little bit of rice noodle, and then some carrots, a bit of cucumber, and anything else you may like. And then you just do the sides first. I find it's easiest that way. And then you want to wrap it as tight as possible without ripping the wrapper. So I like to fold in the sides and then take the edge closest to me and kind of make a tight little wrap if I can. And then just keep rolling and tightening, kind of like you would a sushi roll. And there you have it. And then just stack them on a plate as you go. They can get stuck together, so just be careful about that. And then just keep wrapping and rolling to your heart's content. Now you can eat these rolls just plain by themselves because they have a lot of flavor from the herbs, but traditionally they are eaten with some kind of dipping sauce. So I'm going to show you 2 different sauces that you can use. The first dipping sauce is actually going to be the same as the dressing that I made in the Asian noodle salad video for the Vietnamese salad that I made. So if you guys want to see that video, I will link it in the description box down below, and also I will write out the full recipe in this description box as well. But basically it's a mixture of vegan fish sauce, water, lime juice, maple syrup, and a Thai chili for a little bit of spice. Now for our second dipping sauce, I actually consulted with my mother-in-law for this recipe because she always makes this very delicious dipping sauce to go with our fresh rolls. So her recipe is vegan, but it's not exactly whole food plant-based. There are some a little bit less healthy ingredients in there. So I'm not going to share that recipe today. I'm going to share kind of a westernized recipe that I see a lot of people use, and that is a peanut butter based recipe. Now this isn't exactly an authentic recipe, as I mentioned, but it is very popular to eat with these rolls, and I know that many people like it. So I'm actually going to show you guys a recipe that I modified a bit with peanut butter powder to give it that peanut flavor. But if you only have peanut butter, that will work fine too. So we will need 4 tablespoons of powdered peanut butter. I like to use the powdered peanut butter because, as I've mentioned previously, it is less fat than using regular peanut butter, but regular peanut butter definitely works in this recipe as well. 1 tablespoon of low sodium soy sauce, 1 tablespoon of rice vinegar, 1 tablespoon of maple syrup. And now instead of using water to thin it, I'm actually going to use lemongrass tea. This is just some lemongrass tea that I brewed this morning. And I just really like the flavor that this adds into the sauce. But of course, if you don't have lemongrass tea, then you can always just use water instead. And 3 tablespoons of lemongrass tea or water. To this day, these are still one of my most favorite recipes to make during summer. They are just so simple and fresh and full of delicious, healthy ingredients. If you've never tried making them before, you've got to try them out. Now, the next recipe is quite a unique one. If you've been looking for a healthier alternative to hot dogs, you have got to try these out because these hot dogs are actually made from a vegetable. I guarantee you will be shocked by the taste. So today's recipe is from Brand New Vegan. There are actually a lot of recipes out there for these carrot dogs. Like I said, I've seen many of them before, but I decided to go with the recipe from Brand New Vegan because A, I have actually seen a lot of rave reviews for his carrot dog recipe, and B, I have made his chili before and it is so delicious. So of course we are going to start with some carrots. The recipe says you can use anywhere from 6 to 8 carrots. I'm just gonna use however many fit into our Instant Pot where we are going to both marinate and cook them. Now, one tip I have seen so far about making these carrot dogs is that, of course, carrots are naturally shaped with a larger end on one side and a smaller end on the other side. So when you're taking off the skin, you can actually carve them a little bit so that they're a little bit more even and a little bit more hot dog shaped. I think that not only helps the appearance of it looking like a hot dog, but it also helps it to cook a little bit more evenly because of course if something is really thin, then it'll cook faster. So you want to maybe cut it here and then shave this end down until they're approximately even. So I'm just going to wash, skin, and shape these first. Just a quick tip, as you can see, this produced a lot of extra carrot shreds. Now you could compost these, or if you cleaned them off really well to begin with, you can actually save these scraps. You can freeze them and use them to make into a veggie stock or veggie broth. Or if you just took off the outer layer first and then saved all the inside shreds, then you could actually use them in things like a salad. So just keep that in mind for your leftover carrot pieces. And now I do really like that this recipe gives options of either cooking in your Instant Pot or on the stove top. Since I have an Instant Pot, we're gonna go ahead and use that because you can marinate and cook at the same time, which is amazing. So into our Instant Pot liner, we are just going to add a 1/4 cup low sodium soy sauce, a 1/4 cup apple cider vinegar, a 1/4 cup vegetable broth. I'm actually using this beefless vegan beef flavored broth for the vegetable broth. I'm hoping it will give it kind of a meaty flavor, but if you don't have this, I think any regular vegetable broth will do. 2 tablespoons maple syrup, 1 tablespoon liquid smoke, If you guys don't have liquid smoke, you can actually use smoked paprika in its place. So in this recipe, I would just sub 1 for 1. So instead of the 1 tablespoon of liquid smoke, you could use 1 tablespoon of smoked paprika. Or if you don't have either of these, you could just leave it out. But in my experience, adding at least one of these does enhance the flavor. And if you found this ingredient swap option helpful, do me a favor and hit the like button, as it does really help out my channel, and I would be very appreciative. We are also going to need 1 teaspoon mustard, 1 teaspoon minced garlic, 1 teaspoon jalapeno juice, and half a teaspoon onion powder. Okay, so we have our carrots and we have our marinade, and it is not a lot of marinade. I actually saw in the original recipe that it says if you have an 8-quart pot, you may need to double your marinade because it's not quite enough liquid for the Instant Pot to work properly. So this is just barely enough. Like, my gut is telling me to add more veggie broth, but I'm just gonna leave it as is, as the original recipe states. And I think we can fit about 6 carrots in here. Let's see. It's a little tight, but I think it's okay. I think it'll work. So if you can fit all 8 in there, great. If not, you can just do a smaller batch. I'm just swishing the marinade around a little, just get them coated. Now, just another quick tip if you are using the Instant Pot, I recently purchased some extra silicone rings for my Instant Pot liner because I noticed the original one that I've had since I first got this, it was starting to smell a little bit funky, and I ran it through the dishwasher and everything, but I just noticed that when I cooked like sweeter things or neutral things, it would have like a little bit of a funny smell to it. So I bought the extra rings. It came in a 3-pack. I'll actually link them down below in case any of you guys want to check them out. I do think it's really convenient to have to switch out. Like when I make Instant Pot yogurt, I switch to a clean ring. For neutral tasting items like grains, rice, oatmeal, things like that, I'll just use the plain clear ring. This is the new one that I got. And it just pops right out. And then for stronger scented things and savory items, I like to use the older ring. And so we're just gonna use this one for the carrot dogs. Like I said, this is optional. It's just if you're doing the Instant Pot method. It's just a little tip that I noticed can help if you're cooking both sweet and savory things in your Instant Pot. So now we're gonna cook this on high pressure for 3 minutes. And then after the 3 minutes is up, we are going to do a quick release of the pressure, which essentially is just releasing the valve on the back to let all the steam out. And then we are going to let those sit in the marinade in the Instant Pot with the lid on for 1 hour. So they have just been chilling in the marinade in the Instant Pot with everything turned off, but the lid still on. Now, I did check the texture of the carrot right away after it finished cooking because I feel that is one of my concerns about this recipe, is that it's either gonna be too soft of a carrot or it's going to be too firm and crunchy and will be the texture of a carrot. So I kind of poked them with a fork a little bit because I was worried that after 3 minutes of pressure cooking, they would be too soft already, but they still felt quite firm. So I went ahead, like I said, and put the lid back on, and they have just been sitting and I guess kind of continuing to cook because it's still very warm in there. So I'm gonna go ahead and bring them out now. Hopefully they have softened a bit more and they're feeling a little bit more like a hot dog than like a carrot. I don't know, I'm still skeptical. The smell is really good. Q actually came in here and was like, wow, it smells very meaty in here. So that's a good sign, but let's just see how this goes. They are still really firm, which I don't know. It just doesn't seem like they're soft enough. I feel like maybe I could have cooked them for 1 extra minute already. But actually the next step of this recipe is to grill them. Since I don't have a barbecue going right now, I'm just going to pan fry them and then put them on a bun. I have the bun toasting already. But if you were at a barbecue, you could easily grill these. So I'm just gonna pan fry one of them and we will test it out in our toasted bun. Okay, I already feel like I could have chosen a thicker carrot because it looks very small and thin on the hot dog bun, but that's fine. I just have some plain mustard and ketchup here. Visually, other than the size, like the thinness of it, it does look like a hot dog. That's not bad. The flavor is really, truly on point. Like, wow. Basically, all you taste is the seasonings and is really, really tasty. My only problem now is that my carrots are definitely undercooked. They're just a little bit too crunchy to be passable as hot dogs. So I'm actually gonna put them back in the Instant Pot for another 2 minutes because they're just way too firm. You don't want them too soft. Of course, you don't want them mushy, but this is like, there's still a little bit of crunch in there, and that's not good for a hot dog. So I'm just gonna re-cook the rest of those, especially because those are all a lot thicker than this one, so I'm sure those are even crunchier. But other than that, this is pretty good. So these are much softer. I mean, they're definitely still not mush, which is good, but I am able to pierce them with my fork. And I'm just gonna switch out this old one with the new one. And even though I did not grill it or pan fry it or anything, we're just gonna give it a little taste. That flavor is crazy. I mean, there is the slightest hint of carrot flavor, especially when you're eating it by itself. I don't think you're gonna fool anyone to actually think it's a hot dog. But that being said, when it's on a bun with all the condiments and you're just biting into it like this, you might not know right away that it's a carrot. As long as you get the texture right. That texture is important. Like I said, I'm giving you guys my real, true, honest feelings about this recipe. The taste is almost spot on for a hot dog. It is very smoky, it is a little bit meaty. The texture I do think needs to be improved. Like I said, I did mine for 5 minutes. I'm even thinking I could have gone 6 minutes. Maybe if I were to do them on the stovetop, it would be a little bit easier to control how long to cook them for, because you can check them a little bit more easily by just piercing them periodically with a fork. So I do think that's one advantage already for the stovetop versus the Instant Pot. So for me, A++ on the taste. I'm sure we will be making these again this summer. And now that we've successfully turned carrots into hot dogs, it is time to take another summer favorite, watermelon, and turn it into tuna. When I first heard this recipe, I was completely mind blown, but you guys, this one is actually really tasty. Now, of course, watermelon makes a delicious summer snack just on its own, or you can turn it into a watermelon slushie, you can turn it into popsicles, ice cream, so many different ways to use watermelon. But I really love that watermelon can be savory also, and I think it's often an overlooked option. So this is actually a recipe that has been around for a while. I think I first saw it like 3 or 4 years ago actually, and it has always just looked so interesting to me. Like, first of all, the concept of making watermelon into a savory dish just kind of boggles my mind already. So I just felt like this is a recipe that I had to try, and you know, 3 or 4 years later, I'm finally doing it. Now, I do have to say my expectations for this recipe are pretty low because I just feel like there's always going to be that watermelon flavor hidden in there somewhere. So I'm not exactly expecting this to taste like real tuna, but I am very curious just what does it taste like? So I did search a lot of different recipes to find kind of the best one that I could, and I did notice that a lot of them were using a neutral oil, which I guess makes sense because there is kind of like a fatty quality to tuna, but I was looking for a recipe that was as low oil as possible, so I kind of combined a couple recipes together. So I'm gonna link all the recipes that I used for inspiration in the description box down below, and of course I will also write out my full recipe there as well. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. I've actually already been marinating the watermelon in the fridge for the past few hours. So I'm just gonna walk you through what I did this morning to go ahead and start the watermelon tuna. So the first thing we're going to need to do, of course, is to cut the skin or rind off of our watermelon. Now we're just going to cube the watermelon into chunks. I did read in a lot of recipe notes that the watermelon will shrink when you bake it, which we are going to do. So do make the chunks a little bit larger than you want to eat them because they will shrink down quite a bit. Then I just made the marinade, which is tamari, rice vinegar, and sesame oil. Now, finding a substitute for sesame oil is quite difficult. It has a very unique flavor that I feel that even sesame paste doesn't really quite match up to. So if you are completely no oil, I'm not exactly sure the best substitute suggestion for this recipe. I personally do keep sesame oil on hand for certain recipes because sometimes there just is no replacement, and I feel this just might be one of those recipes. However, if you guys have any substitution suggestions for this sesame oil, let us know in the comments down below. I'm sure a lot of people would love to know if there are any. I also added some nori seaweed, which is just the seaweed sheets that we use for making sushi rolls. And I just blitzed about 1/3 of a sheet in the blender, and that's how I got little tiny flakes, and then sprinkled that all over the watermelon as well. This hopefully will give the watermelon tuna that kind of fishy flavor that tuna would normally have. So now the watermelon tuna is just chilling in the refrigerator. It needs to marinate and let all of the flavors soak into it. So we will be back in a couple hours to go ahead and add it to the oven. Now, just a quick note about baking. You actually don't have to bake this recipe. I've seen a lot of recipes where you just put the watermelon into the fridge to marinate, and then you just go ahead and eat it cold straight from the fridge. So that's definitely an option as well, but of the things that I've read, the texture changes a lot once you bake it. So that's why I'm going to go ahead and try it that way. But if you didn't want to bake it, you definitely don't have to. Okay, so our watermelon has been marinating in the fridge for the last few hours, and I didn't want to leave it marinating for too long. I know that some recipes say you can marinate it for 6 hours or even overnight, but since I didn't use any neutral flavored oil or any oil other than the sesame oil, I didn't want the flavors of tamari to be too strong. I didn't want the watermelon to get too salty. I think if you had the extra oil in there, it would cut down on the amount of salty flavors that are seeping into the watermelon. So I think just a few hours should be good for this recipe. And now I have preheated the oven already. We are just going to pop these onto a baking sheet with some parchment paper, or you can also use your reusable baking mats if you'd like. And we are going to let this bake in the oven and then hopefully take on the texture of tuna. Okay, it smells very interesting in here. I'm not sure that it smells like fish or tuna or anything, but it does smell salty in here. So actually what I did is I flipped all the pieces after about 30 minutes, and then I just took off the small pieces after 1 hour of baking, and I left the large pieces for the full 1.5 hours. So do note that when you're cutting your watermelon, if you can cut them all approximately the same size, they will bake in the same amount of time instead of doing what I did, which is having to take off the small pieces before the rest of the pieces are done. I also noticed that my pieces got a little bit charred. I think my oven runs a little bit hot, this new oven does. So I think for next time I would probably bake it at 330 for my oven, and that way we won't have any of the pieces get any like burned areas. But I mean, visually, this is so intriguing. I'm not really sure what it looks like, but it's definitely an interesting texture and interesting color. Like really such a unique concept. Whoever thought of this is like very clever. Okay, let's go ahead and give this a try. I have zero expectations for what it should actually taste like, so I'm curious. Let's go ahead and do this. Huh. That is interesting. I am not convinced that it tastes like tuna. To be honest, I haven't had tuna in a really long time, like over 4 years. However, before going vegan, I did have it a lot, and I don't remember tasting it like this really. It does still taste pretty good. It is like very salty, very savory, but I think that the watermelon juices do add a touch of sweetness into the overall flavor, which makes for a really good marinade combo. There's really hardly any watermelon flavor. There's like a very, very slight hint, but it still doesn't taste like watermelon on those pieces. Like if someone were to serve this to you and you didn't know what it was, I don't think you'd guess watermelon. I don't know what you would guess, but probably not watermelon. I don't think that I'm going to be trying to fool any of my friends into thinking that this is tuna, but I do kind of like it, and I think on a little poke bowl, it might taste really good. Well, if nothing else, it does look really good. I actually kind of like the small hint of sweetness coming from the watermelon. I mean, definitely manage your expectations so that you're not thinking that it's gonna taste like tuna, because I don't really think that it tastes like tuna. Maybe if you were to up the amount of nori, because the nori is really what's giving it that fishy taste. But everything else is kind of like just giving it like a salty flavor. So just go into it knowing that it's not gonna taste exactly like tuna, but it does taste good. It is a really fun way to use up watermelon, and it makes a really nice little meal here. And if you didn't know, the watermelon rind can also be used up as well. So you can have a totally zero waste meal out of the whole watermelon. I'll link a couple recipes down below for watermelon rind pickles and also watermelon rind curry. Now, I know summer is a busy time for a lot of us, myself included. Maybe you're spending a lot more time outdoors or on summer holiday, or maybe you just don't want to spend a lot of time in the kitchen these days. So that was the inspiration behind the next set of recipes, something that was simple, that was easy to take on the go if needed, but most importantly, something that would not take me a lot of time in the kitchen so I could be out doing more fun summer activities. First, let me show you exactly how a sandwich meal prep is gonna save you time. Imagine you come into your kitchen ready for lunch and decide on an easy sandwich. So what are we gonna need? Some bread, some condiments, a filling, and I personally like as many different toppings as I can fit in there. And suddenly you've taken out half your fridge already just for one sandwich. So we're actually going to start today's prep by making some sandwich boxes, and that way when it comes time to put your sandwich together, it will just be that much faster and easier. With avocados, they will turn brown after a couple days, so I do just like to leave the pit inside. That'll help keep them fresher longer. And of course, just fill these boxes with whatever sandwich toppings you like. And then of course, you don't have to use separate boxes. You can just put everything into one large Tupperware if you prefer. You can also add any other fillings like vegan cheese or vegan deli meat if you wanted right into this box. So now when you're ready to make a sandwich, you just grab that box and then maybe 1 or 2 extra condiments like hummus or mustard, and you're ready to go. So now let's talk actually making the sandwich. Of course, ideally, you would want to put your sandwich together as close to the time that you're going to be eating it as possible. But I know that doesn't always happen, so let me share some tips and tricks to reduce sogginess in your bread if you have to prep your sandwich the night before. So first of all, using a sturdier bread, especially something like a baguette, is gonna give you the best results. But even if you're using something like a regular sandwich loaf, I have found that toasting the bread beforehand can actually help reduce some of the sogginess. So even if you're prepping your sandwiches the night before, go ahead and toast your bread, let it cool down, and then add your toppings and your fillings and your condiments. If you've tried the toasting technique and you're still getting soggy sandwiches, another way to do it is to add the wetter ingredients as close to the middle of the sandwich as possible. So I would put your hummus, your roasted red pepper, your pickles, your tomatoes, all as close to the center of the sandwich as possible, and put the drier things on the outside like lettuce and sprouts, and those can kind of create a barrier between the bread and the wet fillings. So another option is to assemble your sandwich right before you eat it. You could take your bread separately and then of course this whole filling box with you, and then literally assemble it right before you eat it. but I know that's not always convenient. So now with these tips and tricks in mind, let's prep some easy sandwiches, wraps, and rolls. Let's start with a breakfast sandwich. This is actually the tortilla wrap hack that was super popular last year. I am bringing it back because it is really convenient for a grab-and-go breakfast. Now I know Just Egg is a pricier item, so if you wanted a budget option, you can definitely swap this out for something like sliced tofu, or even those mung bean patties that I did in a previous video. I will link that down below if you want to check them out. So I'm using these ancient grain wraps from Costco, and then just a bit of vegan cheese, vegan egg, a little bit of hot sauce and sliced potato, tomato, onion, avocado, and a little bit of everything but the bagel seasoning. And then I do like to crisp this up in a pan. It kind of has the same effect as toasting bread does. Now the PB&J is of course a classic, but I feel like it's overlooked a lot. I mean, it's a sandwich that everybody loves, and it's of course vegan friendly, and it can be eaten for both breakfast or lunch. So if you wanted to make this a little bit healthier, you could swap out the store-bought jam for a homemade chia jam. With strawberries in season right now, it might be really fun to make your own at home. It's super easy. I actually have a video for it, which I will link down below. And you can even jazz up these PB&Js even further by adding something like a sliced banana in there. Now sushi is another great option for grab-and-go meals. You'll often see it at like grocery stores for a really easy takeaway lunch, but those can sometimes be like $6 or $7 for just an avocado roll or a cucumber roll. So making your own at home is definitely gonna be cheaper, and it's honestly really easy. I just had this leftover rice in the fridge already from a batch prep. I just like to microwave it for about a minute. It does help it spread more easily. And then I'm also just adding a little bit of rice vinegar and soy sauce directly into the rice for flavor. Now you could of course keep your wasabi and ginger on the side in a tiny little Tupperware, but I usually like to add it directly into the roll, and that way you don't need to do any dipping while you're out and about. You can just grab the whole roll and eat it. And with fillings, again, just choose whatever you like. Sometimes I like all veggie. You can even add some cooked sweet potato in there. You can do a vegan egg or some tofu if you like. So many options. Now my tip for sushi is not to cut them into little tiny pieces. I know they're cute and they are a little more presentable that way, but honestly they're so much easier to eat if you just cut it in half, and they're much less likely to fall apart. Now lunch wraps I feel are super versatile. You can basically use any kind of fillings you like. What I actually like to do is if I have any leftover salad in the fridge, I'll basically just add all of that into a wrap. Instead of bringing cutlery with you on the go, you just put everything into the wrap and you can eat it with your hands. Now if you have time, you could do some homemade lentil wraps here. Of course the store-bought is always gonna be easier and more convenient, but if you wanted a healthier option, you could definitely do those red lentil wraps. They're really easy to make and a good way to add some extra legumes into your diet. For this wrap, I'm just using these tortillas that I also got from Costco with a little bit of hummus, pickle, roasted red pepper, tomato, onion, cucumber, seitan, lettuce, and sprouts. And my tip for this wrap is not to overfill it, even though as you can see, I did overfill mine a bit, but the less full it is, the easier it will be to wrap. And then I find it helps seal the edge if you just cook it in the pan for a couple minutes. And I have actually been meal prepping these tangerines. I just find it's easier to have the peel already removed, and it works perfectly in these lunch boxes. Now the parchment paper is going to help you if your wrap is a little bit too full. It'll just help hold everything together. And lastly, we're gonna make a no tuna chickpea sandwich. This is one of my favorite sandwich fillings. What I actually like to do is to make a large batch of the filling, and then I have this sandwich ready to go for the next few days. Now, like I mentioned earlier, if you wanted to use a sturdier bread like a baguette, that will probably help reduce some bread sogginess, but we're just gonna keep it easy here and use the toaster method. Now, like I said earlier, if you do want to reduce the sogginess of your bread, you could keep the mustard and this no tuna chickpea filling more towards the inside of your sandwich. And again, we're just going to wrap this in parchment paper to hold everything nice and tightly together. And then just adding a bit of our pre-prepped watermelon, some trail mix, and our prepped celery. So now we have sandwiches, wraps, and rolls ready to go. You can take them anywhere. You can take them to the beach, on a hike, to a picnic in the park. These are perfect for summer, and I hope you can see now that sandwiches can be perfect for meal prep as well. Now, besides meal prepping meals, I also really like to prep desserts, not just to save me time in the kitchen, but with desserts, I just find that I like to have a healthy option on hand. Especially in summer, there are ice cream cones, cookies, fudgesicles, and popsicles everywhere. So if I have a healthy-ish dessert alternative already prepped and ready to go, I'm much more likely to stick to my healthy eating. So let's go ahead and start off these recipes with one of the easiest, but what I think is also one of the most delicious of the recipes. For this recipe, all we're gonna need is some vegan chocolate chips or dark chocolate. Just double check the ingredients, make sure it's vegan, as well as some tahini and sweet black grapes. Not green grapes or red grapes, but the sweet black ones are really best here. And then you need about a cup of chocolate. I like to mix my dark chocolate with the vegan chocolate chips for a little more balanced sweetness. And then we're just gonna microwave that in 20-second intervals, stirring between each time until it's fully melted, which takes about a minute. And then add in your tahini, and this is basically just for flavor, so you can leave it out if you prefer, but it is quite delicious and I highly recommend trying it out. And then we're just gonna dip our grapes one by one into the chocolate, and you wanna make sure your grapes are really cold before starting, so either pop them in the freezer for 20 minutes or make sure they've just come out of the fridge. And that way the chocolate will harden pretty quickly after they're dipped. And I found that using a toothpick is quite helpful for this, but if you don't have toothpicks, you can definitely just use your fingers. And then pop these into the fridge until they are hard. And then these can be stored in a Tupperware in either the fridge or the freezer. I like to buy a lot of mangoes all at once and just slice them all at the same time. And the best way I've found to slice a mango is just to slice off the edges around the pit, then make some cuts both vertically and horizontally, and you'll get these cute little cubes, which are really easy just to scoop into your bowl. And then with the pit, just remove the peel around that outer edge and very carefully cut off those extra bits. You can actually just suck some of it off with your teeth, but just do be careful cutting this because the seed can be kind of slippery. And we're also gonna need some popsicle molds for this recipe. I will link the ones that I have in the description box down below, or you can also just use an ice cube tray and some popsicle sticks if that's all you've got. So just measuring out 1 cup of mango and then adding that to the blender until it's liquefied. Then into the molds and rinse out your blender cup. And then we're gonna do half that amount of another fruit. I'm using strawberries. Layer that on top, insert your popsicle sticks, and then pop those into the freezer until they're solid. Now, if you're having trouble getting your popsicles out of their molds, a quick trick is just to run it under hot water for about 20 or 30 seconds. It may not even take that long, just until you're able to easily remove the mold. I used to always use spotted bananas for these chocolate covered bananas and for nice cream. And I have since realized that they actually don't taste as good as a more perfectly ripe banana. So if you've tried banana nice cream before and you didn't really like it, I would recommend trying bananas that are not overripe and see if that helps. And then of course, we're also gonna need some popsicle sticks for these. I didn't have any, but I did have stir sticks, which work the same. And this recipe is so easy. All we need to do is slice these bananas in half and carefully insert the popsicle sticks into the bananas and then set them in the freezer to harden. And I'm just using this chocolate tahini mixture again, but of course you could just use plain chocolate here instead. And we're just gonna carefully dip the banana. Now, the chocolate will harden very quickly since you're adding room temperature chocolate to a frozen banana, so you wanna put your toppings on as quickly as possible. And you can use any toppings you like here. I'm just using some crushed walnuts, sprinkles, sesame seeds, and dragon fruit powder. For our yogurt bark, of course, we're gonna need vegan yogurt. I love this Maison Riviera brand, but feel free to use any vegan yogurt you like, and also any fruit chunks you like. I'm just using strawberries because it's what we had. And then I also had some lemon zest in the fridge from our last meal prep, so I'm just adding that, as well as a drizzle of maple syrup, which as soon as I poured it on, I was like, oh no, it is not as beautiful with that drizzle on there, but that's okay. The taste was amazing. So you can decide if you want it to be aesthetically pleasing or if you want it to be a little bit sweeter with the maple syrup. And then just slice your bark into pieces with a knife and store in the freezer. And I found it stored better with a little bit of parchment paper, and if you do have more than one layer of bark, just stick a little parchment paper between the layers so that they don't stick together. For this recipe, we will need some chickpeas. I just had some in the freezer, so don't mind that large clump of frozen chickpeas, but that just goes to show the benefits of a batch prep because I had these chickpeas ready just waiting for me to use them. So I just rinsed them off with some hot water and they are good to go. And then we're just gonna add the chickpeas to the food processor. I like to blend these up first before adding the other ingredients, and then just adding in our peanut butter and some maple syrup. Now you can leave this recipe as is, or optionally you can add some vanilla extract, or I'm using vanilla powder, and a little bit of flaky sea salt. That'll just boost up the flavor, but it is totally optional. You may also need a couple tablespoons of ice water to smooth it out a bit, and then just go ahead and give it a taste, make sure it is sweet enough for you. And then comes the fun part. I mean, you can totally eat this as is, it's ready to go, but of course it's a lot more fun to add some mix-ins. So I'm just doing some vegan white chocolate chips and cranberries in the first batch, and the classic combo of chocolate chip and walnut for the second batch. And then you can store that in a Tupperware in the fridge or freeze it for later use. And then something a little extra, but it is really fun. I actually like to scoop these into tiny balls. You can just set them on parchment paper, and then we are going to freeze these for about half an hour or an hour. And then we're gonna use that same melted chocolate and tahini to coat these balls. Again, the chocolate will harden very quickly, so go ahead and add a little bit of flaky sea salt if you want on the top as quickly as possible. And then these are ready. And then as with all these desserts, you can store them in the fridge, or if you don't wanna eat them all right away, store them in the freezer. And that way you can make a large batch and have them ready to go either a week later or a month later, totally up to you. Now, if even after all these recipes, you're still looking for a little bit more summer inspiration, you've got to check out these videos here. I've put together a short playlist with a couple more summer favorites I think you might enjoy.